recording. Um, okay, so today Julian and I will be presenting about South Africa.
Okay, our opinion. South Africa's creditworthiness should not change. Since our country is not living up to its economic potential, they do not deserve a higher rating, and the economic growth recently has not helped their case. From an African outlook, South Africa is a leader. From a global outlook, South Africa has not prepared themselves to be viewed as an extremely stable economy, and is still not fixed its lingering issues of the apartheid.
So before we get into an economical breakdown, we're going to give you some historical context. Starting in 1948 and ending in 1994, the apartheid has had major economical impacts on South Africa, not only during its existence, but also in the long term. Through controlling the government, white South Africans secured majority of the educational funding and high-paying jobs for themselves, while leaving the Black majority with little to no education, educational funding, and low-skilled, low-paying jobs. With this inequality, majority of South Africa's population did not have the ability to progress economically, which can still be seen today. So now that I've addressed the apartheid, throughout our presentation, we'll see some recurring themes of inequality, large dependence on exportation, and an alarming national debt in South Africa's economy. So starting with a GDP of $351 billion, South Africa is one of the largest economies within Africa. But its strength has seen some recent ups and downs in the past few years. With just in 2011, their GDP stood at $416 billion, but dropped to 296 billion in 2016 due to a decrease in demand from China. Since 2016, though, South Africa has slightly recovered from its decrease, and it has been sitting around a $350 billion benchmark from 2017 and now until to 2019. And this benchmark is evident with their GDP growth of only 0.2% in 2019, which was caused by poor and selfish economic policies. Okay, focusing now more on specific industries. Natural resource exploitation makes up nearly 30% of South Africa's GDP, raking in around $109 billion in 2019 alone. With such large trade, South Africa has formed a close relationship and seemingly dependent relationship with China that makes up 15% of their exportation. And besides China, South Africa also trades with countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, and India. Another alarming theme in South Africa is their national debt, which currently sits close to 60% of their GDP, with a value of 210 billion. The alarming aspects of their debt is the rate at which it is growing, projected to reach 82% of their GDP in 2021. But we will further explore their surprising response to this national debt in our fiscal policy section.
Here we'll compare South Africa to its African counterparts. The economic performance of South Africa is really relatively impressive when compared to that of other African countries, especially Nigeria and Tanzania. Although having a larger GDP around 447 billion United States dollars, Nigeria's population of 200 million people has a mere per capita rate of $2,000. South Africa, on the other hand, with a GDP of 350 billion and a population of almost 80 million people, has a GDP per capita of $6,000, which is 3 times that of Nigeria. As for Tanzania, whose population is nearly identical to South Africa's, their economies are completely different. Both Tanzania's GDP and GDP per capita rate are 1/5 the size of South Africa, which has a lot given that they have the same amount of people.
So tying back to the inequality of the apartheid and its lingering effects on the South African economy, their current employment demographics show the extent to which these problems still exist. With South Africa generating majority of their GDP through the service industry, many of the low-skilled workers have taken up jobs in the service industry as anything from housekeepers to tour guides. And this large service sector within South Africa does, however, show the high development within the country and what really differentiates it from the rest of African countries. Moving now to education, like I said before, South Africa faces major inequality due to the apartheid, with, as of right now, 38.9% of the labor force has not even graduated high school. And another 12.1% have no education at all. And this lack of education directly transfers into another major problem of unemployment. So getting into unemployment, in the past 5 years, South Africa has seen a steady increase in their employment rate, with the COVID-19 pandemic not helping at all. Just from 2015, employment has rose to 26%, to 27.5 in 2017, and 30% in 2020. You might also be curious as to see the sharp decrease in South Africa's unemployment in 2020 to nearly 23%. But this drop comes directly from the national lockdown that occurred during the early days of the pandemic and forced many individuals to no longer look for work. So one potential solution to this unemployment problem that we found in our research is the introduction of IWOSS jobs into the South African economy, which are basically low-skilled jobs that require less education than traditional occupations. And with a focus on tourism and agriculture, South Africa hopes to increase their unemployment in these sectors by 26% combined, and potentially partially alleviate their unemployment rate. And then we get further into the inequality of education and employment. South Africa has gained a Gini index of 0.65, which is the second highest in the entire world. And this inequality greatly affects the progress at which South Africa's economy could be making, and further leaves the rich minority with power while the poor majority suffer at their hands.
Another branch of this inequality is revealed in the country's economic freedom. South Africa's economic freedom score is 59.7, making its economy the 99th freest in the 2021 index. South Africa is ranked 9th among 47 countries in the sub-Saharan African region, and its overall score is above the regional average, but below the world average. We see this recurring theme again. South Africa is doing well in this region, in Africa, but against the world, South Africa is unequal. South Africa's economy remains in the ranks of the mostly unfree again this year, the third year after nearly a quarter of a century in the modernly free category. To regain momentum towards greater economic freedom, the government will have to prioritize improvements in the judicial system and confront persistent labor market problems that trap more than 1/3 of the workers in the informal economy.
So moving now to the price level, you can see here that inflation and the cost of living has had a steady increase in the past 10 years in South Africa, with here showing that just from 2015 to 2020 alone, there's been a 27% increase in that price level. And we can only expect the level to further increase in the future.
And here shortly I'll talk about the cost of living. In this picture, we can see that education is extremely expensive and inclusive from the start in preschool for South African children. This is evidence of inequality in the foundation of the academic system. No money equals no education, and it's easy to see why citizens are struggling in the future because of their lack of education in their youth. Next slide, please. Next, I'll dive into the country's COVID response. South Africa implemented an 8-step COVID plan that suppressed the potential number of cases. Together with Egypt and Algeria, South Africa was considered to be at the highest risk of the virus, but they responded immediately with the national lockdown in late March. Data shows that rural impoverished communities and the younger population has also been affected more than other parts in the world. South Africa's already overstretched public healthcare system was unlikely to withstand an explosion of COVID-19 cases, particularly considered that the better managed healthcare systems in some high-income countries were overwhelmed. Only 16% of the South African population has access to medical aid, and around 80% don't have medical insurance. This is with most of its population relying on the public healthcare sector that is under-resourced and poorly administered. In addition, the South African healthcare system carries a significant burden of tuberculosis and HIV. And because of the lockdown, South Africa's currency, the rand, plummeted to an all-time low, a sacrifice that President Ramaphosa needed for the people's well-being. Other than the lockdown, South Africa has failed to distribute vaccines in 2020, but also and has also released a Ramaphosa COVID-19 stimulus package originally announced in late April, amounting to approximately 26 billion, which is equal to 10% of the country's GDP. Okay, monetary policy. In face of massive national debt, South Africa's central bank has conducted an effective expansionary monetary policy. They have cut inflation by keeping interest rate low so that long-term economic growth is promoted. As you can see by the graph, their current interest rate is around 3.5%, and historically, the monetary policy plan has tightened throughout the years, and slowly, this will cut their debt. The central bank seems to be looking out for the nation's best interests with their actions, but the corrupt government has taken a more selfish route with their fiscal policy. To understand the utter embarrassment that is South Africa's fiscal decision making, let me provide some background on the government's policies, the government's problems. The African National Congress has dominated politics in South Africa since the end of the apartheid in 1994. Corruption scandals forced former President Jacob Zuma to resign in 2018, and current President Ramaphosa replaced him in 2019 when the ANC won the elections. But they also attracted their lowest ever percentage of the vote. Maybe this has something to do with the leaders of the central bank being appointed because of their resume rather than the government officials being elected by the people. Remember, the lowest ever percentage of the vote. Either way, South Africa is not maximizing on their economic potential. They have implemented a contractionary fiscal policy plan. Let me repeat that, contractional policy. They plan not to increase taxes in 2021, but they do want to decrease the debt with decreased government spending. As you can see in the graph, the personal income tax rate stands around 45% and has remained stagnant um, in the last couple of years. The decision not to increase taxes is reasonable. Citizens will not be able to deal with high taxes since the unemployment is sky high. However, the government's plan to decrease spending is not only ridiculous but contradictory. Contradiction. I'm sorry, my apologies. Um, like I mentioned in the earlier section, the government has already released a huge stimulus package to help their people, and yet they decided that they want to spend less money in the future. It just doesn't make sense. We all know that because of the coronavirus, every country is losing money. So a country like South Africa, who is already in massive debt, has nothing to gain at a reduced spending. Logically, their best option is to go into further debt with government spending. So when the economy fully reopens, the country will be in a position to make money. Take the United States, for example. The U.S. is in $1 trillion worth of debt, but actively pushing for a stimulus package. So when the economy opens again and the opportunity arises, the economy will flourish. Citizens need money during a recession so that they can either give it back immediately or so they could splurge when the markets open, which will eventually cut the debt in the long run. However, South Africa disagrees with their logic. With a terrible fiscal policy plan, a record high unemployment rate, and billions of dollars worth of debt, South Africa's future looks bleak. We're aware that in many aspects of this presentation, we have been harsh on the current state of the economy and its future, but the potential and strength of the economy, despite a horrific historical background and a lackluster region, says something. Throughout our presentation, there have always been two halves to our argument: South Africa versus Africa, and South Africa versus the world. South Africa is its content leader and has a strong monetary policy plan along with good trade. However, South Africa isn't anything close to a leader in the global market. They aren't a staple of economic growth, and they aren't a staple of economic prosperity, and they also don't have great growth. And despite excelling in certain areas like wine production and natural resource slash mineral extraction, they also lead the world in inequality and have the most alarming lingering effects of systematic racism. Numbers alone reveal that South Africa isn't doing so well, but truthfully, they should be way worse. South Africa is in complete chaos and an economic crisis despite all the terrible situations they have put themselves in. Maybe, just maybe, if they live up to half of the economic potential by fixing the root to most of their problems, the educational system, they'll become a decent economy when compared to the rest of the world. And because of this reason, and many others that we stated, South Africa credit worthiness deserves to stay the same.
I just want to say thank you for watching. Um, and then following this, we just have our bibliography here
Mhm.
and one more. All right.
So
Thank you
thank you.
again.